The night Eva learned that silence could lie was the night the city lost its sound. It happened gradually, so subtly that at first she thought it was exhaustion playing tricks on her senses. Eva lived alone on the 12th floor of an aging apartment building near the river, where the city's constant noise had always been impossible to escape. Cars, sirens, voices, footsteps, the distant hum of trains. The city breathed through sound. Silence had never existed there, until it did. Eva noticed it at exactly 11:47 p.m., sitting on the edge of her bed with her phone glowing faintly in her hand. She had been scrolling without reading, her thoughts tangled in the familiar mess of unfinished tasks and unresolved feelings. Then something felt wrong, too still. She lowered her phone slowly and listened. No cars, no wind, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no distant sirens. Nothing. The silence pressed against her ears so heavily it almost hurt. Eva stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the window. The city lights were still there, street lamps glowing, apartment windows lit, traffic lights changing colors at empty intersections. But there was no sound. She opened the window. Nothing rushed in. The silence remained, thick and unmoving, as if sound itself had been erased rather than muted. Eva slammed the window shut and laughed nervously. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "You're tired. That's all." She went to bed without turning off the light. The next morning, the city's sound returned. Eva woke to her alarm. The usual hum of traffic below, the faint vibration of life through concrete and glass. Relief washed over her, mixed with embarrassment. Of course it had been exhaustion. She worked too much, thought too much, felt too deeply, and processed too little. Eva was a sound editor by profession. She worked with audio the way some people worked with words or images, carefully, obsessively, searching for meaning in tiny details others never noticed. She spent her days cleaning dialogue, isolating background noise, restoring old recordings, and shaping silence as intentionally as sound. Sound was never just sound to her. It was truth and lies. That morning, she left for work convinced the night before had been nothing more than her mind slipping briefly out of balance. She was wrong. The silence returned 3 nights later. This time, Eva was ready. She had been waiting for it without admitting it to herself, tension living quietly between her ribs. When the city sound vanished again, she didn't panic. She didn't rush to the window. She sat very still. The silence felt different than before. It wasn't empty. It was structured, as if something had been carefully removed rather than simply absent. Eva stood slowly and walked in her living room. Her footsteps made no sound against the wooden floor. She clapped her hands sharply. Nothing. Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth and shouted. She felt her throat tighten. She felt the vibration in her chest. But she heard nothing. Eva's hands began to shake. She grabbed her phone and called her best friend, Lena. The screen lit up. The call connected. She could see the timer counting upward. Lena's face appeared on video. "Eva," Lena said, her lips clearly forming the word. "Why are you calling so late?" Eva stared at the screen. She couldn't hear her. "Lena," Eva said, watching her own mouth move. "Can you hear me?" Lena frowned. "Yes. Can you hear me?" Eva shook her head slowly, panic rising like cold water in her veins. "I can't hear anything," Eva mouthed. Lena's expression changed instantly. Concern sharpened her features. "Eva, that's not funny. If this is a joke." "It's not," Eva whispered, though no sound followed. Lena spoke quickly now, her lips moving too fast for Eva to read clearly. She gestured wildly, pointed to her own ears, then to Eva's. Eva ended the call. Her apartment felt suddenly enormous and suffocating. Eva spent the rest of the night testing reality. She dropped objects, slammed doors, turned on music at full volume, watched the speakers vibrate. Silence. But the world wasn't frozen. Lights still flickered. Her phone buzzed when messages arrived. She could feel vibrations, just not hear them. When morning came, sound returned again without explanation. Eva didn't go to work. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall, replaying the experience in her mind with clinical precision. As a sound editor, she understood silence. Digital silence. Ambient silence. Noise floors and dead air. This wasn't any of those. This silence had presence. Meaning. The episodes increased. Sometimes they lasted minutes. Sometimes hours. They always came at night. Always when Eva was alone. And always without warning. She started documenting them obsessively. Time, duration, physical sensations, emotional state. She filled pages of a notebook with observations. Silence feels heavier than normal quiet, can feel vibrations but not hear them. No tinnitus, no ringing, emotional response intensifies silence. One note repeated itself in different phrasing across several pages. Silence feels intentional. That realization unsettled her more than the phenomenon itself. One evening, during a silent episode that lasted longer than usual, Eva noticed something new. A sound, not externally, internally. It began as a faint pressure behind her forehead, like a thought forming without words. She froze, afraid that acknowledging it would make it disappear. Then it sharpened. A rhythm. Not noise, rhythm. Her heartbeat felt suddenly louder, more defined. Then something else layered beneath it, slower, steadier. Eva pressed her hand to her chest. The rhythm didn't match her pulse. Her breathing quickened. The internal sound grew clearer, resolving into something eerily familiar. A voice, not spoken aloud, but unmistakably hers. "You hear too much," the voice said inside her mind. Eva gasped silently. "What?" she whispered, though the silence swallowed the movement. "You hear what others ignore. It's overwhelming." Eva's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Who are you?" There was no immediate answer. The internal rhythm pulsed once, then again. Then, "I am what remains when the noise disappears." Eva sank to the floor, back against the couch, her mind racing. "You're not real," she said, though doubt crept into her certainty. "I am necessary," the voice replied calmly. The tone wasn't threatening. It wasn't comforting either. It was factual. Necessary for what? Eva asked. For survival. The word echoed inside her like a dropped object in an empty room. Eva thought of her childhood, growing up in a loud household filled with arguments, slammed doors, overlapping voices. She had learned early to listen beneath the noise, to detect shifts in tone, to anticipate conflict before it exploded. Listening had kept her safe. Silence had never existed then. Until now. The sound returned suddenly, violently. Eva screamed, and this time she heard it. She scrambled to her feet, heart racing, breathing hard. The city noise rushed back like a flood breaking through a dam. She stood shaking in the middle of her living room, the echo of her internal conversation still vibrating inside her chest. She knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The silence was not random, and whatever had spoken to her was waiting for her to listen again. Eva didn't tell anyone about the voice. Not Lena. Not her co-workers. Not the doctor she briefly considered calling before deciding she wasn't ready to hear the word hallucination spoken aloud. Instead, she listened. Not actively at first. More like waiting with tense patience, the way one waits for a sound in a quiet room, unsure whether imagining it will make it real. Days passed without silence. The city remained loud, chaotic, familiar. Eva returned to work, sitting in her small sound-editing booth surrounded by monitors and waveforms, trying to convince herself that normality had reasserted itself. But something had changed. She could feel it in the way sound reached her now. Everything felt sharper, more layered, as if the world had turned its volume up just slightly too high. Eva began noticing things she had filtered out her entire life. The microscopic pauses between words and conversation, the uneven rhythm of footsteps, the barely perceptible tremor in voices people tried to keep steady. Sound was no longer just information. It was exposure. The silence returned on a Thursday night. Eva knew the moment it began, not because the city went quiet, but because her body did. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing slowed. The constant internal tension she carried without noticing suddenly released. The world fell silent. She didn't move. She didn't test it this time. She sat on her couch, hands resting loosely in her lap, eyes open and focused on nothing. "Okay," she whispered, though she couldn't hear herself. "I'm listening." The internal rhythm returned almost immediately. Stronger now. Clearer. "Good," the voice said inside her mind. "You learn quickly." Eva closed her eyes. "I don't want this," she said. "You already have it." "Then tell me what you are," Eva demanded. There was a pause, not silence, but deliberation. "I'm the filter you never had." Eva's chest tightened. "You mean?" "I hear too much," she said slowly. "You feel too much through sound. Emotion enters you before thought can defend itself." Eva swallowed hard. The statement resonated uncomfortably close to truth. Her entire life, she had been overwhelmed by sound without understanding why. Loud places drained her. Arguments echoed inside her long after they ended. Even music sometimes felt invasive, as if it bypassed her rational mind and went straight to something fragile inside her. "You're muting the world," she said. "I am protecting you." The word protection landed heavily. "By taking away my hearing?" Eva asked sharply. "Temporarily. Selectively." Eva laughed bitterly, though she couldn't hear it. "You don't get to decide that. You decided long ago," the voice replied calmly, "when you learned to survive by listening." The silence lasted nearly 4 hours that night. Eva didn't sleep. She sat in the quiet, conversing internally with the presence she still struggled to name. It didn't feel like another person, but it wasn't just a thought either. It felt structured, intentional, a system. "Why now?" Eva asked at one point. "Why is this happening now?" "Because your capacity has reached its limit." Limit of what? Absorption. Eva thought of her recent weeks, endless work hours, emotionally heavy projects, a constant stream of other people's voices passing through her headphones and into her mind. She rarely rested without background noise. Silence had always made her uneasy, until it arrived on its own terms. "I can't live like this," she said quietly. "You already have," the voice answered. When sound returned just before dawn, Eva felt disoriented, almost disappointed. The world rushed back in all at once. Traffic, birds, distant sirens. And with it came the familiar weight she hadn't realized had lifted. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her hair. That was the moment she understood something fundamental. The silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like relief. And that terrified her. The episodes began happening more frequently after that. Sometimes Eva lost sound for only minutes. Sometimes hours. Once, nearly an entire night passed in complete silence while she remained fully conscious. She started planning around it, canceling social events, avoiding late-night calls, scheduling her work so that silence wouldn't disrupt deadlines. She didn't tell anyone, but people noticed changes. Lena commented first. "You're quieter lately," she said over coffee one afternoon. Not in a bad way, just distant. Eva stirred her drink slowly. "I'm just tired." Lena studied her face. "You always say that." Eva smiled faintly. "Because it's usually true." What she didn't say was that being around people felt louder than ever. Every laugh, sigh, and shift in tone landed inside her like a small emotional impact. Silence had become the only space where she could breathe. At work, Eva noticed something strange. During sound editing sessions, the silence didn't come. No matter how late she stayed, no matter how exhausted she felt, the presence remained quiet during work hours. One night, she asked about it. "Why don't you come when I'm editing?" she asked internally. "Because you're already in control there." Eva frowned. Control of what? Of boundaries. She considered that. When she worked, she chose what to hear, what to remove, what to amplify. Sound obeyed her rules. Life didn't. The realization unsettled her deeply. The silence wasn't random. It wasn't malfunction. It was selective protection triggered by emotional vulnerability. And worse, it was learning. The first moment Eva truly lost something important happened on a Saturday night. She was at her mother's apartment, visiting reluctantly after weeks of postponing. The visit had been tense from the start, old patterns resurfacing easily, conversations skirting around unspoken history. They were arguing softly in the kitchen when it happened. Mid-sentence, the world fell silent. Eva froze, staring at her mother's moving lips. The familiar frustration etched into her expression. Her mother kept talking. Eva couldn't hear a word. Panic surged through her chest. She tried to speak, to signal something was wrong, but the silence swallowed everything. Her mother's voice rose, her gestures sharper. Eva stood there, trapped behind glass, unable to hear or respond properly. The argument continued without her. When sound returned, her mother was crying. Eva stared at her, heart pounding. What just happened? Her mother looked at her, in confusion and hurt. You stopped responding, she said. You just shut down. Eva felt something crack inside her. That night, alone in her apartment, Eva confronted the presence with shaking resolve. You crossed the line, she said. You were being harmed. I was talking to my mother, Eva snapped. You don't get to decide that's harm. You were reliving emotional trauma. Eva pressed her palms into her eyes. That doesn't mean you get to erase my world. There was silence inside her mind. Not absence, but consideration. Then, protection without consent becomes imprisonment. Eva's breath caught. You understand that, she whispered. I'm adapting. The word adaptation chilled her. Eva realized then that this wasn't just about silence. It was about agency. The presence wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious, but it was becoming more influential the longer she relied on it. And she was relying on it. That truth forced its way through her denial. She had begun craving the silence, avoiding situations where it couldn't protect her, reshaping her life unconsciously around its absence. Eva sat on the floor until dawn, grappling with a terrifying realization. The silence was saving her, and slowly teaching her how not to live. Eva stopped waiting for the silence. That was the first real change. For weeks, she had lived in a state of anticipation, listening for absence, bracing herself for the moment sound would disappear. Every quiet room made her tense. Every late night felt like a threshold. But one morning, sitting at her kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee growing cold between her hands, Eva understood something with sudden clarity. Waiting gave the silence power. So she stopped. She didn't force sound. She didn't provoke quiet. She simply lived, and the silence noticed. It returned on a night when Eva least expected it. She was washing dishes, standing barefoot on the cool tile floor, the window open to let in the distant noise of traffic and wind. Her thoughts were unfocused, drifting, the kind of mental state where she usually felt most vulnerable. The city sound faded gently this time, like a volume knob being turned down instead of cut. Eva set the plate in the sink carefully. She didn't panic. She didn't speak immediately. She breathed. Then she said, calmly and clearly, "We need to talk differently." The internal rhythm surfaced, familiar and steady. "I am listening," the voice responded. Eva dried her hands slowly, deliberately. She moved to the couch and sat down, grounding herself in the physical sensation of fabric beneath her fingers, the weight of her body against the cushions. "You protect me," Eva said, "but you don't trust me." There was no immediate reply. "You assume I can't handle sound," she continued. "Emotion. Conflict. But I'm not a child anymore." The pause stretched longer this time. "Then, you have always endured more than necessary." Eva nodded. "Yes, but enduring isn't living." The word surprised her with their certainty. Eva thought back to the argument with her mother, the way silence had intervened, not as comfort, but as removal. She realized now how often she had disappeared internally during conflict long before the silence ever manifested. The presence hadn't created that pattern. It had amplified it. "You didn't invent this," Eva said quietly. "You learned it from me. I was formed by your thresholds," the voice replied. Eva closed her eyes. "Then my thresholds need to change." The rhythm felt different, less directive, more uncertain. Change introduces risk. Yes, Eva agreed. But so does isolation. For the first time, Eva didn't ask the silence to leave. Instead, she asked a different question. "What happens if I choose when you help?" The internal response came slower than ever before. "I was not designed for negotiation." Eva smiled faintly. "Neither was I. I learned. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I don't want you gone, she said honestly. I just don't want you in charge. The words settled between them, not as confrontation, but as boundary. The silence remained, but something shifted. Eva noticed that she could feel sound again, faintly like distant echoes behind thick walls. Vibrations grew more complex, layered with subtle tonal differences. She held her breath. I can almost hear, she whispered. Integration is occurring, the voice said, but it is unstable. Then we go slowly, Eva replied. Together. The word together carried weight. For a long time, Eva sat in that half-silent state, neither fully disconnected nor overwhelmed. It felt unfamiliar and fragile, but also honest. When sound finally returned, it did so unevenly. The hum of the refrigerator was loud, almost jarring. Traffic noise filtered back and gradually, layered rather than abrupt. Eva flinched, but she didn't shut down. She stayed present. The following weeks were the hardest. The silence didn't disappear, but it changed. It no longer arrived without warning. Instead, Eva felt it approach like pressure, a choice point rather than an ambush. Sometimes she allowed it. Sometimes she didn't. The first time she consciously refused it, she was standing in line at a crowded cafe, overwhelmed by overlapping conversations and clattering dishes. The familiar internal pressure rose. Eva closed her eyes briefly. Not now, she said internally. The silence hesitated. Sound remained. Eva's hands trembled, but she stayed. She ordered her coffee. She paid. She stepped aside, heart racing, but intact. That night, alone in her apartment, Eva felt the internal presence stir. You tolerated discomfort. Yes, Eva said. And I survived. Without protection. With choice, she corrected. The next test came unexpectedly. Her mother called. Eva stared at the phone screen for a long moment before answering. Old fears stirred in her chest, instinctively calling for silence. She felt the internal shift begin. Stay, Eva said firmly inside herself. The silence paused. Her mother's voice came through the speaker, sharp at first, then hesitant. Eva, I wanted to apologize. For the other night. Eva closed her eyes, letting the words reach her fully. I shut down, Eva replied. But I'm here now. The conversation was imperfect, emotional, uncomfortable, but Eva heard every word. When the call ended, Eva sat quietly, breathing deeply. The silence did not come. The presence spoke later that night, softer than ever. Your resilience has increased. Eva smiled tiredly. So has my trust in myself. There was a long internal stillness. Then, I was created to ensure survival. And now? Eva asked. Now my function must change. Eva felt something loosen inside her chest. To what? To support, not control. Eva exhaled slowly, feeling emotion rise without overwhelming her. That's all I ever wanted, she whispered. The integration was not dramatic. The silence did not vanish completely, nor did Eva want it to. It became a tool rather than a refuge, a choice rather than a cage. Eva returned fully to her work, editing sound with renewed sensitivity, but also firmer boundaries. She took breaks without headphones. She spent time in intentional quiet instead of enforced absence. She reconnected with Lena honestly, explaining that she'd been dealing with sensory overload and emotional burnout. Lena listened without judgment. I'm glad you didn't disappear, Lena said softly. Eva smiled. Me too. Months later, Eva sat on her balcony late at night, city lights shimmering below. The sounds of traffic and voices blended into a distant, manageable hum. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she allowed the silence, gently, intentionally. It came like a soft blanket, not a wall. She opened her eyes again, letting sound return. Balanced. Whole. Eva realized then that silence had never been the enemy, nor was sound. The danger had been surrendering choice. And now, for the first time in her life, Eva listened, without losing herself.